Honorable members, the Honorable Mr. President,
Bonjour chers collègues, je vous invite à observer une minute de silence pour prier ou méditer. Veuillons nous asseoir.
Would you please take your seats?
La séance est reprise.
Our session shall resume. Dear colleagues, warm greetings in this deliberation room of our parliament, and I welcome the presence, the media, principals of media, and those that are in the booth that are helping us in conducting our meeting. And once again, allow me to commend the women for their conference, and I call upon them to ensure that their recommendations get to their respective countries. Clerk, would you please read out the first item on the agenda?
Merci, Excellence.
Thank you, Your Excellence, President. The first item on our agenda this morning is the presentation and discussion of a report on the draft motion to pay tribute to His Excellency Robert Gabriel Mugabe, former President of the Republic of Zimbabwe. Thank you very much. A presentation and discussion of a motion to pay tribute to his former President of Zimbabwe, Robert Mugabe, and I call upon Honorable Zanet Kabira to introduce that motion.
Merci, Honorable Président, pour...
Thank you, Honorable President, for giving the floor. A draft motion to pay tribute to His Excellency Robert Mugabe, former Head of State of the Republic of Zimbabwe. And recalling that the former President of the Republic of Zimbabwe, His Excellency Robert Gabriel Mugabe, a Pan-Africanist, defended his country and Africa throughout the world, and aware of his search for the unity of Africa and also equal treatment of African countries in the concert of nations and League of Nations, and also his determination to promote and protect the fundamental rights of the women, the youth, and the children, and aware also of his advocacy to promote women as potential and unavoidable partners for the development of the African continent, and also recognizing the heritage that has left not only to Zimbabwe but to Africa and the entire world, and not taking note of the important lessons that we have learned from him with regard to solidarity and commitment for Africa, recognizing also his firm commitment and determination to Robert Mugabe to ensure the financial autonomy of the African Union Commission to enable the African continent to own its own programs, and the Pan-African Parliament decides to ensure that people of Africa, people of Zimbabwe and Africa and the rest of the world we would like to pay tribute, a deserved tribute to the fallen hero who left us at the age of 1994, done in Midrand on this day. Thank you very, very much, honorable member who would like to support the motion. Thank you very much, Chairperson. I think that that motion comes at the right time for taking into account the what former President Mugabe did to promote African solidarity. And I think that that motion deserves to be supported by the Pan-African Parliament. Thank you very much. Thank you very much, dear colleague. Who is supporting? Honorable Didier Mulisho has also supported the motion. Honorable Adelash Sata and Honorable Jacqueline Amongin. And in line with the provisions of Article 66, subparagraph 1, the debate followed by motion cannot go beyond 1 hour. So I'll give you the floor for 2 minutes only. Would like to know those that would like to take the floor on this motion. You have the floor. Yes, Honorable Fantamadi.
Gracias, señor presidente. Buenos días, compañeros. Desde mi posición de senador de la República de Guinea Ecuatorial, creo pertinente apoyar esa moción al difunto excelentísimo señor Robert Gabriel Mugabe, expresidente de la República de Zimbabue.
Quelle langue, madame? Which language? French is okay. English? Channel number 1, I think. Which channel? Number 1, nothing. English.
Yeah?
English is okay now? Not yet. English version, please. Yes?
Ok, gracias. Estaba diciendo que...
I was saying that I'm Zasturnino, a senator from the Republic of Equatorial Guinea. And I believe that it is appropriate to support the motion, considering the fact that the former President Robert Mugabe of Zimbabwe was a great and a great person of this continent. He was a great president, and he fully deserves this motion. I also would like to commend our friend who had the very good idea of proposing the motion. Microphone seems to have gone off. Microphone of the speaker. We don't hear the microphone of the speaker.
Ok, bueno, había terminado, estaba diciendo que la compañera...
I was saying that we'd like to commend our friend who has proposed this motion, because this is a positive idea, in my opinion. And the late president was someone who worked a lot for his country and the African continent. So what's left to us is to support that motion and welcome the submission of this motion.
Merci, Président.
Thank you very much, the Honorable President. I'd like to commend the Honorable Janet Kabila for this good initiative, because the person we were talking about this morning, and beyond his Pan-Africanism, was a great man, committed to the women's cause and committed also to the African Union. And without any doubt, he led his country to independence and supported all the oppressed countries of this continent. And at the United Nations, we remember his statements when dealing with the great powers. So I fully support this motion, and may he rest in peace.
Je vais partir de la droite vers la gauche.
Move from the right to the left. And then we'll continue.
Señor Presidente, buenos días, queridos.
Much, Honorable President. Good morning, dear colleagues. I would like to commend Honorable Kabila for introducing this motion. The late President Mugabe was a great Africanist, and he was a great friend of Equatorial Guinea, and he helped us at a given time to stop a coup d'etat that was going to take place. And he has supported all our institutions. He has supported us at international fora, and we know what he did for his people. So we pay tribute. We pay tribute to him because he did a lot to help his people, and so that people might then feel that the countries they live in belong to them. He did a lot for the development of his country, and he promoted women's emancipation and the independence of African states. And everything that he did during that period when he was in power, in all that, he held out his hand to his colleagues who went to him for advice, for support. And as a result, the late President Mugabe was a great leader and who deserves recognition of Africa and the entire people of Africa. Thank you very much. Here,
Person.
don't see anyone who would like to take the floor. Yes, please. Honorable, would you please wait or hold on himself first and then you?
Honorable member, second. Yes.
Thank you, Mr. President. I'm Honorable Pupurai Togarepi from Zimbabwe. I would like to recognize and thank Honorable Kabila for moving this motion. I am from Zimbabwe, a product of Robert Gabriel Mugabe, a man who taught us to be Africans, who made us feel proud as a people. He led us to the freedom of Zimbabwe. He led us from the front. He is a man who gave us education, equality, a man who taught us to be free, a gift that he has given us, which we have today. As a Zimbabwean and many other Zimbabweans who are not here who testify, we are a free people. We look at every person, black, white, blue, as equal. We don't feel inferior in any sense. And I'm happy that fellow Africans, you see this great man in the same eyes that we see him. We are very thankful for this motion, and will continue to remember Robert Mugabe as our leader, and you remain so within a special place of our heart. I thank you.
Thank you. Honorable member, yes, you have the floor.
Thank you. I too am Honorable Yeremia Chana from Malawi. We too in Malawi join to thank Comrade Janet Kabila for the wonderful contribution to this motion. Malawi would not be Malawi without the complete assistance and indulgence of Comrade Mugabe. The fight for the Federation of Rhodesia and Nyasaland was properly facilitated and anchored by Robert Mugabe to support the late Dr. Kamuzubanda in the fight for the freedom. Comrade Mugabe was a fierce, frontline, non-aligned movement leader who relentlessly fought for Pan-Africanism and joined comrades in Ethiopia, Malawi, and Ghana for the movement which today we're calling PAP. I support the motion and wish him well. Thank you.
Yes, honorable member, you have the floor.
Thank you, Mr. President. I want to add...
No, it's you.
Yes.
Yes, stand up.
Thank you, Mr. President. I would like to add my voice. My name is Kakoza James from Uganda. I want to add my voice of those who have thanked the presenter of the motion, and also to say that late Mugabe was a hero of Africa, was a true Pan-Africanist. He was not only a Zimbabwean, but he went beyond an extra mile. After the scramble of Africa, he came in the center stage of all African countries to help them to fight for their freedom. So this is the person who we are not seeing now. We are going to miss him, but the lesson we've learned from them, we as readers in Africa, we should follow that footstep, and we know that Africa is united, is one Africa, is one voice. May his soul rest in eternal peace.
Thank you. Yes, you have the floor. You, yes.
Good morning, Mr. President. Morning, all honorable members. I would like, in my own name and in the name of the party that I represent, as Honorable Simogil from the Seychelles, to add my voice and to support the motion submitted by Janet Kabila. In that same spirit, I would like to convey our sincere support to the people of Zimbabwe in their loss, and we pray that Honorable Mugabe will be one of the fervent freedom fighter in Africa that we will always remember. We will not forget that he fought for independence of his country, and we will not forget his contribution to the cause of Africa. Africa has one nation. Africa has one people. With that brief words, I would like to congratulate you, Honorable Janet, again, and to convey through you to the people of Zimbabwe a very successful future. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. Honorable Member, you have the floor. Yes,
good morning.
Him, you, Honorable.
Good morning, Mr. President.
Yes.
And good morning, every one of you here. I first of all thank the mover of the motion.
Please, can you give your name? It will be easier for the report.
Yes, I am Honorable Alhaji Sankunjame from the Gambia.
Yes, go ahead, Excellency.
Good. I mean, this is what we expect we the Africans to do. If you go to the motion laid before us, all what is said about the deceased is a fact. And this is what is expected. You know, we have to respect our leaders, and we say good things of them that they have done, especially a great man like Mugabe. We all know Mugabe came to power to fight for the liberation of Africa. You know, we cannot say all about him because maybe we don't know all of his deeds. You know some, others know some. So, but the little that you know about him, you said that. I am in line with the mover, and I also support the motion. And I pray that may God rest his soul in perfect peace. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you. Yes, Honorable, you have the floor.
Merci, Monsieur.
Thank you very much, Honorable President. Honorable Agito Camerol, Senator from the Democratic Republic of Congo. I thank Honorable Janet Kabila for this initiative because it is here that Africa meets through us, the elected officials representing the people of Africa. And President Mugabe, peace be to his soul, was one of the greatest fighters of Africa because as a Pan-Africanist, he played a role in several countries in Africa. We provided assistance to the DRC when we were faced with challenges. He came to the rescue of our country, and we can never forget him. He also helped to emancipate women and the youth because personally I took part in the training at ZANU PF, his party, where I was taught and I learned many things. I learned many things from him because the day he spoke, I came out of that room with a very different idea of Africa, which we'll never forget. We need to be independent, we need to be strong, we need to be united to build Africa, because our people need that. Thank you very much.
Lord Honorable Chief Chorombira from Zimbabwe. No, please. Go ahead. I didn't say. Honorable Jatta, you have the floor.
Thank you, Honorable Speaker. Sidia from the Gambia. Honorable Speaker, it is good that this Parliament is paying homage to one of Africa's greatest sons. I think Mugabe deserves more than this. It would have been important and necessary to consecrate a whole day in paying homage to a man like Mugabe. When he was first arrested during the revolution, I was still a student. And Mugabe and his likes inspired tremendously we, the second generation of African politicians. Generally, he is viewed as somebody who has fought for the liberation of his people, the black people. No. Mugabe fought for the liberation of the human person. I would say he put into practice what we call in philosophy the slave and the master. A slave freeing himself from the master is at the same time freeing the master himself. And that is precisely what had happened in Zimbabwe. In freeing the black person from the oppression of the white person, Mugabe succeeded in freeing the white person himself. And that is the beauty of his work. And I'm glad that the sister from Congo has brought this motion. I think this session would have been incomplete if we had not made a motion of this nature. I pray that his soul rests in peace, and I pray that those who survive him live in peace and in longevity. But the fundamental question we have to ask ourselves, we here in this parliament, is what next? What have we learned from Mugabe? How are we going to immortalize his memory? And that is the fundamental question. The job on our shoulders as African parliamentarians is very heavy. And I think this is an occasion for us to reflect on what we have to do and what we have to do post-Mugabe. They sacrificed their life to lay the foundation for the unity of this continent. And we are here to continue that struggle. Are we committed? Are we ready for the struggle that they have initiated? Are we ready to build on the foundation that they have laid? This is the fundamental question that we have to ask ourselves, we African parliamentarians. Thank you, Honorable Speaker.
Thank you very much. And now I give the floor to Honorable Chief Chorombira from Zimbabwe. The last to my list. Once again,
I'll sit.
Honorable Loïd Kassingo, Honorable Elise Loum, and my list. Honorable Kassingo, you have the floor. Honorable Kassingo, you have. Is Honorable Kassingo? I apologize. Please, Honorable, you have the floor.
Thank you very much, Mr. President. I'm Honorable Beatrice Cornes from Kenya.
Thank you.
And I also rise to support this motion, and I really want to thank my colleague, Honorable Janet Kabila, for bringing this motion. We all know as Africans that we have never had the caliber of Robert Mugabe being the best Pan-Africanist we have ever had in Africa. He led his people to independence, and he taught his people to be very, very courageous. He empowered his people, the youths, the women, and the men equally. Mugabe was a fighter, and I want to say that Mugabe was a leader who cut across in Africa. He worked very closely with retired President of the Republic of Kenya, President Daniel Arap Moi, and he was a close friend in terms of development and encouraging to work for his people. The late Mugabe will be remembered by the whole of Africa, and I want to say that we wish well the people of Zimbabwe, and may his soul rest in eternal peace.
Thank you, Honorable Elise Loum, you have the floor.
Merci, President. Thank you, President. I hadn't asked for the floor, but since you've given it to me, I'll take it. And of reason to welcome the spirit expressed by our sister, Janet Kabila, who has introduced this motion. President Mugabe will remain in the memory of all the men and women of Africa. But beyond our generation, we need to ensure that this tribute is remembered. And this is why I think that this motion is important. Through it, we should keep his memory alive throughout our institution. So I strongly support the motion, and there will be other motions that might be submitted to support this motion. Thank you very much.
You have the floor.
Thank you very much, Mr. President. I want to join my colleagues to thank the mover of the motion, Honorable Janet Kabila, for laying before this August Assembly this important motion to pay tribute to the former president of Zimbabwe, Robert Mugabe. As the name of this August Assembly implies, Pan-African Parliament. It is fitting that in the spirit of Pan-Africanism, we remember somebody who is second to none as far as the spirit of Pan-Africanism is concerned. Robert Mugabe was a liberation fighter and one of the champions of the cause of African cause against colonialism, but also against neocolonialism. He did not only bring about independence to Zimbabwe, but was a source of inspiration to other countries, in particularly South Africa, that led to the struggle to end the apartheid. He did not only become a source of inspiration to South Africa, but also fully supported to the movement that ended the apartheid movement. Africa, as he always claimed to be, cannot gain its independence when its people could not have a say or share of their land. His land policy actually gave the black South African their fair share of the cage, that is the land that which they cannot live without the share of the cage. On that, it is important.
1 minute. 1 minute. Microphone. Honorable member, microphone. 1 minute.
To pay this tribute to Robert Mugabe. And doing so, we hope it's going to be a source of inspiration for all African leaders to live as Robert Mugabe lived.
Thank you, Honorable Zingas. And at the end, Honorable Chief Chorombira.
Merci beaucoup, Honorable.
Thank you, Honorable President. I add my voice to those my colleagues that have spoken before me to commend our colleague Janet Kabila for the initiative which is Pan-African in nature. I would like to propose that this motion be supported by baptism of a son in the baptism of named after him. We've got many young boys. If a room here, let us choose a room or any place that we could name after the late Robert Mugabe, and that will keep his memory living. And we're not here. The other colleagues who will come after us, they'll find that room available. Thank you very much. That's it. We'll have a room named after Robert Mugabe, so we've gone through the 1 hour of debate.
You are exhausted. I cannot refuse the floor, but I try to remind you the rule of procedure. You are already exhausted 1 hour debate. So, Honorable, you have the floor, and the last is Chief Churombira. Yes, you have the floor, yes. You have the floor, and yes, you have the floor, Honorable from Western Sahara.
سيد الرئيس لما سأكون موجزا الرئيس.
Thank you, Mr. President. I will be very brief. Robert Mugabe was an African leader who fought for Africa and for the freedom of Africa, and we all agree on this point. And in the Sahrawi Republic, we declared a day of mourning for Robert Mugabe, and we have named the latest class of our students graduating from the School of Diplomacy as the class of Robert Mugabe. And we pray that God blesses Robert Mugabe and that he rests in peace. I also support the proposal made by my colleague to name a room of the Pan-African Parliament after him. Thank you, Mr. President. I'm Sidi Baba from Mali, and I know that we no longer have a lot of time left. Excuse me, I'm from Mauritania, and I have to add my voice to this motion to add my voice to this motion for Robert Mugabe, and I would like to congratulate those who put the motion forward, and I hope that this man will remain in our collective memories, and I would like to support the motion and support also the suggestion that we name a room at the Pan-African Parliament after him. Thank you very much.
1 minute.
1 minute. Thank you, Mr. President. Mr. President, I am from Zimbabwe. I am humbled by the contributions from honorable members. And we indeed share the same sentiments with the Zimbabweans, as I thank Honorable Janet Kabila for moving this motion. It should better be moved by a person who is not from Zimbabwe. So this is befitting. Just to say, all your highly complimentary statements about Mugabe are true and very correct, and we Zimbabweans share the same. Our former president, was a principled man. You are aware that he was a lecturer in Ghana, top-class lecturer. He left that to liberate Zimbabwe and was imprisoned for 10 years. After prison, he went to the bush. In Zimbabwe, we enjoyed a lot of transformation
from independence. Women, we now have reserved seats 16 in parliament. The land reform program, which is most talked about, we are very happy about the land reform program. Of course, we had to be punished by the Western world for what we did, but we are very happy that that's why we fought for independence, it was for land. So President Mugabe could not let this agenda unattended to. We now are on sanctions because of what we did, and we encourage and want to urge you to support, as you support our late president, also support the fact that those sanctions need to be removed from Zimbabwe, because Mugabe was a great man who led a just cause. And lastly, the issue of African values. You know, he was one of the most outspoken on against homosexuality, which, as he said, that is behavior. 2 seconds. Like human beings should not behave like pigs. And I think we all hold those values. And lastly, the UN reforms. He was one of the key heads of state who would face anyone at the UN, as you all are aware, to say, please, this whole forum, again, is not equal. Some countries are more equal than others, and they fought for equality. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. And now I want to give the floor to Honorable Kabila to respond. But before you take the floor, let me add my voice to the one who congratulate you and the one who bring the full support for your motion. I think Comrade Mugabe was one of the figures of Africa, very strong man, and I can say it's important for us to keep his memory in one of your room, and I think room number 3 will be the best one to be Mugabe rooms. Also, I think it's not only for Mugabe who can take over for heritage of Mugabe. We now who can do something like he did. That is our challenge. We need to be Africanism, and I think we are facing this challenge. So now I give the floor to Honorable Janet Kabila. There are no questions. Maybe some comment for you. Honorable, you have the floor.
Thank you, Mr. President. And once again, thank you for giving me the floor. I would very sincerely like to thank all my distinguished colleagues who have supported the motion to honor President Mugabe. And I think it's an honor that is well deserved. Honorable President, this motion gave us the opportunity to reflect on a man who was a legend on the continent and to pay our respects to him, and this was very well deserved. We need to recognize all the good things that he did and to celebrate his memory in the documents of the Pan-African Parliament, which represents the people of Africa, Africa in all its diversity. And in this August assembly that has just honored one of the most famous Pan-Africanists on the continent, a son, a charismatic son who was well deserving of all the honors from our continent, Robert Gabriel Mugabe. President Mugabe led his country to liberation in 1980 and worked tirelessly for development despite all the challenges that he faced. The President Mugabe was a visionary and a man who knew the important role of education in development. And that is why in 1981, and this was said by Chief Chirambura and our other colleague from Zimbabwe, he declared that education was a human right, a fundamental human right in Zimbabwe. And this declaration led to the creation of an inclusive education system which allowed all Zimbabweans to be well educated. And this is something that remains true today. And many African countries admire the education system in Zimbabwe. Zimbabwe was known then and today as a country with the highest literacy rates on the continent and even in the world. He also made enormous strides in terms of the health system, infrastructure, etc., and this allowed them to reduce poverty levels in Zimbabwe and include people who were previously marginalized. President Mugabe was a real Pan-Africanist who really believed in the policy of non-alignment and self-reliance, self-determination, non-interference in the sovereign issues of other states, and solidarity with his fellow African leaders. And President Mugabe fought tirelessly against apartheid here in South Africa and in Namibia, which was the last bastion of colonialism. And he showed so much solidarity, African solidarity, and he was head of the Troika when he was head of the Council for Peace and Development of Southern Africa. And when my country, the DRC, was victim of an armed attack from the exterior, the Zimbabwe, Angola, Namibia came to support the DRC in conformity with the SADC protocol on Defense and Security, Article 2. Honorable President, DRC will forever be grateful for this act of solidarity, which showed that any injustice shown to one was an injustice to all. And President Mugabe was an ardent defender of Africa on the international stage and Agenda 2063. He believed in the Africa that we all want. He believed in it. He fought for an Africa that was free on a political and economic level. Honorable President, he was also devoted and determined, and he gave his life for the well-being of the African continent, fighting against colonialism and neocolonialism. He was an ardent defender of the United Nations, and he fought for the rights of Africa to have 2 seats on the Peace and Security Council. And this led to Africa participating in the CERT declaration with the support of two-thirds of the United Nations countries. We will never forget Robert Mugabe. We will forever keep him in our memories. And he gave everything that he had, despite the difficulties and challenges he encountered along the way. And we, the members of the Pan-African Parliament, have the responsibility to appropriate and continue to defend the values that Robert Mugabe showed for the people of Africa and for the states of Africa. And if we follow this example, we will be able to make what he began last, as well as continue the values of Julius Marera and many other leaders, the peers of Robert Mugabe, those that Robert Mugabe has gone to join in heaven. And Honorable President, I would like to thank you for having accepted this motion and the proposal to name a room after him. Thank you. Thank you very much, Honorable Jeanette Kabila, for your response. And I would like to say now that heroes never die. They never die. And they leave with us a seed that they have planted, and it's up to us to see that that seed grows across the continent. If there are no further comments on this motion, the motion has been adopted, as well as the proposal. Mr. Clark, you now have the floor to announce what is next on our agenda. Thank you. Yes, I have just been told that we have a new member who is going to be taking the oath. So I give the floor to the clerk. Thank you, Mr. President. It's Indoudier from Mauritania, and he will be coming to take the oath. So you're going to take the oath before men and before God.
Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim.
I am Hind Muhammad bint Wadia, will faithful and bear true allegiance to the African Union and preserve, protect, and defend the African people. I will be true to the African Union and preserve, protect, and defend the Constitutive Act of the African Union and the protocol to the treaty establishing the African Economic Community relating to the Pan-African Parliament as by law established. And I will promote adherence to the principles of good governance, democracy, human rights, international humanitarian law, peace, stability, and all objectives of the Pan-African Parliament. So help me God. I so affirm. Thank you.
Chers collègues, conformément au
Dear colleagues, according to the provisions of the rules of procedure, I have the great pleasure of inviting the representative of the WHO to enter the chamber.
Mr. President, procedure. Mr. President.
Yes.
Procedure.
Yes, procedure.
Yes, I submitted a motion a few days ago. I was expecting that to be on the order paper, but I have not seen it on the order paper.
Hein? Chers collègues, nous avons...
Colleagues, we did in fact receive this motion, and we were supposed to announce it, but unfortunately, because of time limits, we could not hold a debate. In fact, there was a motion to lift economic sanctions on Zimbabwe, and there was your motion as well. And so what I'm going to do is I'm going to include it in the debate into the next meeting. And you can have the floor now, and South Africa as well for their motion. Just to read it, and we will debate in the next session.
For the consideration. A motion for a resolution of
just in terms of procedure, Mr. President.
Procedure.
Will we also be accorded the same privilege, just reading the motion, as is the case with the current person who's on the floor?
Mais c'est quelle motion? Hein? Mais on a dit que le Zimbabwe, on a reçu 2 motions. Et on vous donne la parole de lire les motions, mais ces 2 motions seront inscrites à l'ordre du jour de nos prochains travaux.
We said that we would give you the floor to read your motion, and then we will conduct the debate later. So there's Madame from South Africa who presented a motion on Zimbabwe. Is she here? Is she here to present? Can you turn your microphone off? I will give you the floor. I'll give you the floor later. Yes, Honourable, you now have the floor.
President, a motion for a resolution of the Pan-African Parliament to commend Uganda for the policies towards refugees, moved under Rule 60 of the Rules of Procedure of the Pan-African Parliament. Whereas there are about 68.5 million forcibly displaced people worldwide, including 40 million who are internally displaced as per the United Nations High Commission for Refugees, a report in early 2018. And whereas Africa hosts 85% of the refugee population, with nearly 1/3 of the world's 68 million forced migrants. Aware that Uganda is the 2nd largest refugee hosting country in the world and the largest in Africa, with over 1 million refugees, most of them from South Sudan, the Democratic Republic of Congo, DRC, Burundi, and Somalia. Further aware that the refugee population in Uganda has been growing since 2013, and currently about 200 asylum seekers arrive daily in the country. Cognizant that host countries continue to shoulder the responsibility of facilitating refugees with basic needs, including provision of land for shelter, farming, thereby empowering refugees to become economically self-reliant. Recognizing that Uganda's refugee policy guarantees freedom of movement and the right to employment, education, and health, as well as the right to start a business. Appreciating that some refugees have established businesses and employed nationals, while others are boosting food production through agricultural activities, with others working as professionals. Now, wherefore, be it resolved by the Pan-African Parliament as follows. A, that Uganda be applauded and appreciated for having one of the best policies for handling refugees and effective implementation of the policies. B, that other countries model their refugee policies on Uganda's refugee policies. Mr. President, I beg to move.
Merci beaucoup.
Thank you very much. Who supports this motion? Are you supporting the motion? And James from Uganda. The motion is supported and it will be debated during our next session. I give the floor now to the Honourable South African.
Procedure.
Procedure, Mr. President.
Yes, procedure.
Mr. President, I raise a procedural issue for the guidance of this plenary. Whereas you ruled in the past that this motion should be debated in the next session, which would be May next year. However, aware that this year is the year of refugees, and next year will be, the African Union will be handling a different theme. Wouldn't it be prudent that this, as we conclude this year of refugees in the debate and the theme of the year of refugees in the African continent, this particular motion, very relevant to this year's theme, be concluded during this session so that it's an adoption of the resolutions of this session? Mr. President, your guidance. Merci beaucoup.
I know that you are a young MP who follows the rules closely. To debate a motion, you need 72 hours, and we are about to finish our session. To debate this issue in our next session is not a problem, because we need to follow the rules and provide people with 72 hours notice before the debate can be held, and we do not have that time in this session. Honourable from South Africa.
Honorable President, my name is Nkosiake Amos Masondo. I'm the leader of the South African delegation. I feel honored, Mr. President, to table this motion calling for the immediate lifting of unilateral economic sanctions imposed on the Zimbabwean government by the United States, United Kingdom, and the European Union. Mr. President, I hereby, in terms of Rule 61, give the following notice of motion. That this House notes that the economic, financial, and trade sanctions unilaterally imposed on Zimbabwe by the United States of America, United Kingdom, and the European Union since 2002 have had grave repercussions, not only to the country's economy and the fundamental rights of the Zimbabwean people, but the entire SADC region, which continues to reel from the catastrophic effect of these sanctions. Deeply concerned that these unjustified unilateral sanctions have grave and untenable egregious impact to women, children, and ordinary citizens of the country. Referring to the World Summit on Sustainable Development in 2015 and the unanimous adoption of Agenda 2030 for Sustainable Development, which emphasized inter alia the absolute rejection of the unilateral coercive measures by the international community. Further noting that these unilateral sanctions have serious impact on Africa's Agenda 2063 goals and priority areas, in particular Goal 6, which calls for member states to strive for Africa whose development is people-driven, especially its women and youth, and caring for children. Supporting the resolution of SADC heads of state and government demanding the immediate lifting of economic sanctions unilaterally imposed against the government of Zimbabwe and its people by the US and the EU. Agree with SADC heads of states that these sanctions have not only affected the people of Zimbabwe and their government, but the entire region, which continues to be the recipients of the negative and the atrocious effect of these sanctions. Acknowledging that the government of Zimbabwe under President Emmerson Mnangagwa has opened a new chapter and is ready to constructively engage with the rest of the world. Therefore, the current unilateral sanctions by the US, Britain, and the EU are necessary, and they harm the innocents, counterproductive to regional efforts to achieve the SDGs. Recognizing and appreciating the PAP's gallant and hero campaign in 2016, which led to the successful uplifting of economic sanctions imposed by the United States of America on Sudan since 2007. Noting Africa's long-standing principle of solidarity, long-standing practice which enjoins Africa to adopt common positions on issues which affect the continent, and the Pan-African Parliament slogan of One Africa, One Voice in resolving challenges. Therefore, resolve that this House debate and adopt this motion calling for the immediate lifting of economic sanctions unilaterally imposed by the United States, United Kingdom, and the European Union on the government and people of Zimbabwe. The lifting of these unilateral economic sanctions will enable the government of Zimbabwe to attract foreign direct investment, which will serve as a catalyst for economic recovery, which is so needed to meet the expectations of its citizens. Mr. President, I beg to move.
Qui supporte la motion?
Who supports this motion? Who supports? Yes? Are you supporting? Who else supports this motion? Are you all supporting? Okay, the Parliament takes notes and the motion will be debated during our next session. And I would like to ask the author of this motion to invite a senior official from Zimbabwe or a senior MP from Zimbabwe to explain the current situation in Zimbabwe. We need more clarification, more clarity on the issue for the debate. So please ask a member of the Zimbabwean government to please, in support of your motion, please explain the exact situation in Zimbabwe so that we can take the same or similar action as we did for Sudan. You now have the floor.
Procedure, Mr. President. Procedure.
Procedure.
Mr. President, I want to move under Rule 66 of our rules of procedure, manner of debate of motions. And that is Rule 1. And Rule 1 clearly stipulates that the presiding shall allocate time within 1 or less than an hour to debate a motion. And the Rule 2 speaks also is very clear in regards to how motions are disposed of. And Rule 3, the presiding officer may call upon the mover to reply at the end of the period. Mr. President, there is no rule that says that the motions will be deferred to be debated in the next session, which next session is next year, in the uniqueness of the Pan-African Parliament. Mr. President, the fact that I'm aware that 2 motions have already been presented to this House, but the very motion on refugees has been the talk of the whole year. I would have thought it prudent, Mr. President, with your powers, that certain minutes be allocated to this particular motion or less, and it be disposed of, because these are issues we've been talking about throughout the year, so there wouldn't be really nothing much. It would be really either adopting the motion and we proceed. Mr. President, I request.
Madam
Honorable Member, you refer to the Rule 66, but the Rule 61 is clear. You need to read the rule from 1 to 2. 61, paragraph 2. Paragraph 1 says that notwithstanding the parliamentary provisions, but the motion here is included in the agenda before 3 days, 3 full days. Give us 3 full days so that we can debate these motions. We can consider this even after 1 year. We recognize that this year is the year of refugees. I don't see any problem here. Give us at least 72 hours before to submit your motion. And today we are closing. I'm referring to Rule 61. This is what is written here.
Please, the Secretary will have the floor.
Clerk, you have the floor, sir.
Secrétariat.
Justement,
it is Rule 61, paragraph 2, that refers to the principle of 72 hours. That's the time before the meeting starts. Only if the president of the session thinks that it is an urgent matter and decides to discuss it on time. But there should be a period 72 hours. The motion was lodged last week, and we took the time necessary before we discuss it.
Procedure.
Mr. President, I think we should interpret the rules properly. An oral motion cannot be a written motion which is submitted within three days. I do believe, according to what the presenter of the motion, my colleague, he wrote the motion and you allowed it to be received, and it was received. The only thing, it was not included in the order paper because of the time. But it's within your powers, your discretion, that if the plenary can accept, being the importance of the theme of this year, whole year, that 30 minutes cannot cost. It's within your powers. You can allow 30 minutes to be debated and you flood it, because it will lose the meaning by next year. If 30 minutes and the plenary can accept to hear that motion which has been received within 30 minutes, I don't see any harm, rather than waiting for it when we shall be tackling another theme in the next year. And it will help us, as the sitting Pan-African members of Parliament this year, to flood this theme and conclude it once for all. I don't see any harm, because this motion is not an oral motion. It was a written motion, submitted and received. The only thing which was there, it was not included on order paper. It's within your powers to give 30 minutes and people listen. Once they listen, it doesn't cost anything. But I think it's quite important for Pan-African Parliament, since it's the theme of the year, to offload this work, not to continue with it next year and we debate it. I would like to thank you.
Guidance, Mr. President.
S'il vous plaît.
Please, I do not want this to become a problem of Uganda. The rule is clear. We need to deal with the issues of interest public, and the president can decide on them. In this particular case, our colleague from the Gambia submitted a written motion, and it must be translated in the 3 languages. That's why we need the 72 hours to enable the secretary to prepare the motion. The motion was received. It was a written motion and it was received. Now, it was not an oral motion. And if that is the case, in the case of oral motions, the president decides if it is of public interest. I'm not rejecting anything. Sometimes you say that I'm not complying with the rules, and when there are, and I'm following what the rule says. I'm saying that we can. I can be recognized. For this, I asked Honorable Jacqueline, if this motion had been submitted at the beginning of this year, we wouldn't be here. Why should we block our work? Someone said it earlier. Let's avoid what divides the parliament. We have our agenda, and let's continue with our work. And interpretations can only divide our meeting. The clerk, you have the floor for the items in our agenda.
Guidance. Mr. President, I want to appreciate the guidance that you've given to this House. Aware that last week, when you presented the activity report, you also we raised the issue on the motion and you okayed it. Mr. President, it's on record. The motion was submitted 3 days ago. The same day, we submitted the motion to applaud His Excellency, the late former President Robert Mugabe, which motion has been debated today. Mr. President, you also say that the President has the discretion to decide on issues that are relevant and important to the continent. And I think the issues of the displaced, the issues of the refugees, and the issues of the IDPs are a key interest to the continent. And Mr. President, we want to appreciate the fact that Gambia was able to bring this motion for debate in this House. It means that Uganda is playing a critical role. And in fact, if this continent believes that that role is very applaudable, I don't see any reason, Mr. President, why if we cannot even debate that motion today, why we can't accord that motion time before we conclude our sitting of this session, probably tomorrow. Mr. President, over to you. It's my prayer, sir.
Vraiment, chers collègues, je suis...
Dear colleagues, I'm sometimes disappointed when people turn the debate into a passionate debate. The motion was received on the 15th. On the 16th, we did not work. So 16th is today. 16th is today. This motion was submitted on the 15th, and today is the 16th. Jacqueline, my friend, this is the proof of receipt. It is not the president who receives the mail. Can you allow us to move on with our work, please? Jacqueline, in Aswatwa, we will deal with that. Please sit down. We take note of your comments. Now I give the floor to the clerk to call on the following agenda items. Following item in our agenda, presentation on the report of the High-Level Pan-African Summit on HIV and Health Financing held in Brazzaville, Congo on the 11th and the 12th of July 2019. This is a presentation without debate. I invite Honorable Orias, the chairperson of the Standing Committee on Health, to make his presentation. You have the floor, sir. I believe that the recommendations are going to be very useful to us, Honorable.
Merci beaucoup, très honorable.
Thank you very much, Honorable President of our Parliament. Honorable members, dear colleagues, in the program that was, in the order that was sent to us, the Committee on Health, Labour and Social Affairs was requested to make two presentations. The first one is on the report on the High-Level Pan-African Summit on HIV, which was held on the 11th and the 12th of July 2019 in Brazzaville in the Congo. The second presentation deals with the mission that was carried out by the committee in Côte d'Ivoire, the information mission on child labor in mining areas in Côte d'Ivoire. But given that the first report on the Pan-African High-Level Summit was not adopted within the committee, I would like to appeal to the August Assembly to consider this report in the next session. The Committee on Health, Labour and Social Affairs needs to adopt it first before it comes to the plenary. But now, Mr. Chairman, yes, you have the floor, sir. You were supposed to make 2 presentations. Can you give us the conclusions of the first Brazzaville meeting? Now, what is the problem of giving us the major outcome of the Brazzaville summit, and then you can deal later with the report on child labor in mining areas. So we have this included in our order. Mr. Chairman. Yes, Mr. President, the report on the high-level Pan-African summit was given to our committee, and it is also the work of the entire Pan-African Parliament. A communique was made, the report was made, but officially the committee did not consider the report. As the chairperson of this committee, till this morning, I did not discuss this with my assistants. I cannot engage the commitment I chair, and I myself, I'm not prepared to do this. My assistants are still dealing with it, and they have not contacted me this morning to tell me what they've done. I cannot do this type of work with this dysfunctioning. That's why I asked for postponing this this report. Do what you want to do, says the President. Yes, we can postpone it. Thank you, says the Chair. Could you please submit the second report? The second presentation was supposed to take place this afternoon. The second report by Mr. Zinger. Mr. Clark, since we have the time, and I'm going to travel this evening, we can use this time to present the report. Mr. Zingers, you know that changing the order requires the adoption of the plenary. You cannot change it unilaterally. So this is a problem here. This is included in our order, the order of the day, but it's supposed to be presented in the we will see how many people will attend this afternoon. Now, does the plenary accept to change the order of the day, says the President? No. Honorable Zengas, you will make your presentation in the afternoon, even with 2 members attending. I will not be here, Mr. President, in the afternoon. I won't be here. Thank you, Mr. President. The following item in the order is a presentation and debate on WHO PAP session on non-communicable diseases in the context of UHC. I would like to invite Patrick Abouret to make his presentation.
Merci, Honorable Président.
Thank you, Honorable President, honorable members of the Parliament. I am Patrick Abouret. I work for the WHO Regional Bureau dealing with non-communicable diseases at the office in Libreville. It is an honor and privilege to be able to speak to this August Assembly, and I wish to convey to you the greetings of the Director General of the WHO for Africa, who was happy with the invitation and for the opportunity given to us to deal with an issue that has an impact on our continent. My presentation is going to be, the slides are in English, but I will make my presentation in French. I will deal basically with two issues. First of all, I will give you an overview of the scope of non-communicable diseases, and I would talk about the frequency and the main risk factors. I will also address the response made by the international community to this scourge. I will also deal with the ways of dealing with non-communicable diseases. When we talk about NCDs, we bring under this name 9 groups of diseases. The first one is the cardiovascular diseases, heart and arteries. Second group is diabetes. The third group is cancer. The fourth group is respiratory chronic diseases, and there are 5 other groups that we call to refer to diseases related to blood diseases, mental illnesses, psychic disorders. We also have non-communicable diseases, oral diseases, and we have ocular problems and hearing problems. In this group, we have all types of violence and anything related to trauma. This group of diseases shares a number of characteristics, and the first characteristic is the fact that they are chronic as opposed to communicable diseases which develop through acute modes. This group of diseases is not communicable from one person to another or through a particular vector. And that's not the case of communicable diseases such as malaria, tuberculosis, HIV/AIDS, and the like. Another characteristic of these diseases is that can involve a long, high cost, and you can. And we can have specific accidents like brain strokes. These chronic diseases can have an acute manifestation. These diseases share the fact that they have in common certain genetic factors, sometimes physiological factors, and they are related to factors related to behavior and the environment, and we shall address this later. Finally, in the group of 9 diseases, in the group of the 9 diseases I talked about earlier on, we need to understand that the first 4 diseases, heart and vascular diseases, diabetes, cancer, and respiratory and chronic respiratory diseases, are responsible for 2/3 of deaths in the case of non-communicable diseases. Next slide, please. When we talk about non-communicable diseases, we need to understand that we are talking about the first cause of mortality in the world. When we look at the figures of 2015-2016, we realize that in the world we had 56 million deaths, and among these 56 million deaths, 40 million of them were caused by non-communicable diseases. So we are dealing with the first cause of mortality in the world compared to other communicable diseases. Now, what about the African region in this regard? In 2015, we recorded about 3 million deaths due to non-communicable diseases. This number of deaths is beyond the figures represents an increase of 30% in 10 years between 2005 and 2015. The previous slide, please. You are going too fast for me. In the previous one, please, says the speaker. I think that we have an issue with the slides. Now, all of this to say is that when we talk about communicable diseases, we are talking about premature deaths when death takes place before the age of 70. Now, we contrary to developed countries, our developing countries or countries with low or intermediate income share the feature of having 15 million deaths, which we called premature deaths, deaths that could be avoided because they take place before the age of 70. I think we have a problem with the slides. This is meant to show you the projection for the African region in the case of non-communicable diseases. In 2010, among the causes of mortality in Africa, which brings together 47 countries, 70% of the diseases are due to non-communicable diseases. It happens that when we project 2025, we are going to have a profile of diseases. We believe that by the year 2025, the non-communicable diseases will have a more important factor, and we have an epidemiological change. So non-communicable diseases will be more important than communicable diseases. The slide shows the risk factors. At the bottom of the pyramid, you have a number of determinants that are used here, and they deal with the non-communicable diseases. We have the communicable diseases. We have the problem of globalization, urbanization. The population is the aging of the population. There are also patterns of consumption. All of these causes create a certain number of risk factors, which is the second level of the pyramid, modifiable risk factors, and they are related to the consumption of cigarettes, a non-balanced diet, lack of physical activity, and the negative impact of alcohol. All of these factors are going to reinforce a certain number of factors which we called the metabolism risk factors, with the issue of high blood pressure or an obesity that is there. Another metabolic risk factor is due to the high level of sugar in the blood and a high rate of fat in the blood. All of this gives way to a group of non-communicable diseases, as I indicated earlier on. I think that we are still having this problem with the slides, but this is meant to show you the distribution of main risk factors in the African region. As regards high blood pressure, we need to understand that there is a serious problem in our region. The prevalence of high blood pressure is high in the region and varies between 24% to 34%, whereas the world average is about 25%. Countries in the region have figures that are significantly higher than the world average. In addition, something that is making the situation worse is that in a recent study we carried out in 11 countries, we realized that 82% of people suffering from high blood pressure do not know about their status, and sometimes they discover it by chance, and particularly during acute cases or following a heart attack or a brain stroke. As regards the second risk factor, metabolic factor, which is related to overweight, obesity. Here again, there is a concern in the region. We have 11% of people in the region who are obese. Obesity means that we are dealing with people who have a body mass that is high, and we can calculate this. We divide that by the size. The normal index should be lower than 25. When we are between 25 and 30, it's overweight. Above 30, it is a case of morbid obesity, an obesity that can be considered a disease. In the African region, unfortunately, most countries have an average of 41%. 41% of the population suffering from overweight or obesity. Another risk factor that is modifiable is the prevalence or the frequency of physical activity. Here again, we realize that the average, the African regional average is 81% of the population do not have a regular physical activity. After presenting this background, which is not very good, there are some good news. Some response was given by the international community and at the international level and also at the regional level. Next slide, please.
En fait, cette diapositive.
This slide shows us the commitment of the international community since the year 2010. You know that at the regional level in 2008 there was the Declaration of Libreville on non-communicable diseases. The ministers of health in the African region also produced the Luanda Declaration in 2010, and in 2011 at the international level there was the declaration of the UN General Policy to fight against non-communicable diseases. And over the years this was translated into a number of summits and high-level meetings, which led in 2015 to the adoption of the Sustainable Development Agenda, which you all know. In this agenda, and here to highlight the importance of non-communicable diseases and the growing scourge in the objective 3 on health. Over the 13 targets, 5 targets are specifically devoted to non-communicable diseases. The first target, 3.4, aims at reducing by 70% all deaths, avoidable diseases caused by non-communicable diseases by the horizon of 2030. The second target, 3.5, which aims at fighting against all types of consumption or the abusive use of illicit products such as drugs and the abusive use of alcohol. And the third target, that's 3.6, which is related to the will to reduce by half accidents, deaths due to road accidents. We have 2 other targets that are related to the effective implementation of the Convention on combating smoking. And the 5th target is related to non-communicable diseases. It aims at implementing research and development to improve access and availability of vaccines and drugs, in addition to technology, to fight efficiently against non-communicable diseases and communicable diseases. The last commitment, and this is really the high-level summit held in 2018, expressed the commitment of the international community, because this meeting was held under the auspices of the United Nations. This summit reinforced the role of heads of state and opinion leaders in fighting against non-communicable diseases. This summit, as you would see this later, underscored the need to develop a new approach to public health by focusing on the five diseases that are most responsible for deaths in terms of non-communicable diseases, but also by dealing with the 14 risk factors I mentioned earlier on, such as smoking, alcohol, lack of physical activity, and in addition to pollution. This summit consecrated the leadership role of the WHO, and also in terms of approach that needs to be done by the people involved in the fight against non-communicable diseases. Following slide. Let me now talk very quickly about a response that was given by the WHO and the ministers of health at a global level. The aim was to translate concretely the political commitment made during the various summits, particularly during the summit of 2011. The aim was to establish a global plan to fight against non-communicable diseases for the period 2013-2020. The aim was to get rid of avoidable deaths caused by non-communicable diseases. The objective was to reduce the burden of non-communicable diseases, either in relation to the frequency of the diseases or in relation to deaths caused by these diseases. The aim is to reduce disabilities that are caused by non-communicable diseases, all of this on the basis of multi-sectoral approaches and through international collaboration. In this world plan, the good news is that have been able at the WHO to identify a number of interventions. We call them the best buy, and the aim is to fight against non-communicable diseases. These are interventions of a low cost and which are easy to implement by countries in the region, irrespective of development levels. The first measure, the first judicious choice made to fight against non-communicable diseases was the fight against smoking. In this area, the list includes what we need to do. Again, the aim is to reduce access to tobacco among young people by increasing taxes and to prohibit the selling of tobacco to minors. And minors should not be enabled to buy easily these products. The second efficient intervention is sensitizing the public about the dangers of smoking. Another third efficient intervention in which you as decision makers can play an important role is to adopt a legislation prohibiting the use of smoking in public places, and this is a part of the Convention on Combating Smoking, and all of these strategies are part of that convention. The third intervention deals with the abusive use of alcohol. The aim is to regulate advertising and the availability of alcohol products.
In many countries, it is prohibited to sell alcohol to minors and during certain hours, hence the importance of legislation. Of course, the aim is to increase taxes, to reduce access to these products, including anything that is to fight against homemade alcohol products. As regards diet and physical activity, here again, a lot remains to be done, because the best intervention needs to focus on what is a reduction of salt intake or salt in manufactured products, and also the reduction of sugar in soda drinks. And this is a scourge because of the urbanization we are witnessing at the moment. The last intervention to fight against non-communicable diseases is primary health services. In this regard, the WHO developed an essential package of health services at the community level.
Also the level of health centers and regional hospitals and tertiary hospitals. A number of interventions which are simple and don't cost too much money and have demonstrated their efficiency with regard in controlling non-communicable diseases. For example, everything that aims at limiting or managing the sugar level during contacts that people have with the medical centers, and everything that relates to advice that could help in preventing vascular diseases. Then there is another measure which is very easy. It is aspirin that we know very well, and this aspirin should be given out at relevant levels, and this, when given out, helps to reduce certain cerebral disease accidents and heart attacks. And as far as integration is concerned in primary health care, these are preventive measures: prevention against cancer, the cancer of the uterus, for example, which affects women in the countryside. So there is a campaign aimed at screening and also treatment, timely treatment when there are any cancerous lesions that have been identified. Next slide. Taking into account the risk factors that we have considered here, you will note that an efficient fight against non-communicable diseases should follow a multi-sectoral approach. So the picture before us gives us the various players that should be called upon if we want to be efficient in fighting avoidable death that is caused by non-communicable diseases. These are governments, first of all, and here this affects all sectors, be it health. And when we look at risk factors, this is not just a health risk, but it's related to food, education, and it's also related to availability of information and what the form of trade that we put into place, and taking into account the health security of foodstuff. And also we will work with other sectors like finance, and then we need also to look at the role of financing to be able to be efficient in this fight. And the other players are the civil society, like the NGOs, and then the private sector, be it at the international level or at the national level. As you can see, this is related to risk factors such as food. So there is a role that can be played by industries. The agro industries can play a role in improving quality of the foodstuffs to reduce risks related to bad feeding. This picture shows that we have some good news, because all the major non-communicable diseases share the same risk factors. If you look at your left, cardiovascular diseases, cancer, diabetics, respiratory diseases, you will see that all these diseases are caused by tobacco, alcohol, diets that are not balanced, lack of adequate physical activities. All these are causes of the diseases. So there are several approaches. All these approaches help. Any approach that helps to fight any of these diseases will also serve to avoid other diseases. So when we implement policies and strategies at national level, let us think of having an integrated approach, and these will help us to be more efficient at a low cost. The picture here is meant to give you good news despite the tables that might be frightening. The problem related to non-communicable diseases go beyond the health sector, because they affect, these diseases affect economic development in our countries. And amongst you, or close to you, you've seen the burden of disease on your families, your people close to you in the villages, and also affects productivity, because these are diseases that are chronic in nature and which take away labor from work and also exert pressure on families in order to support the people affected over a long time, because they live. If one has been, say somebody gets a heart attack, in most of the cases, such people suffer after effects for a long time, and this requires a lot of investment by the family and the society. When you look at the cost, these are chronic diseases. They require technology. Once this technology is put into place, it costs a lot to the individuals. And I'll give you an example. There was a recent study that was undertaken in Ghana, must have been last year, among people suffering from who are diabetic. So among the people who didn't have more than just a basic salary, 70% of their income was spent on treatment and the purchase of medicine. So you can see the impact. Now, talking about best choices, which I referred to earlier on in fighting non-communicable diseases, the picture shows, this picture shows that between 2018 and 2030, when you look forward, we'll see the investments we'll get and the advantages of such investments as we fight non-communicable diseases. In 2020, for $0.49 invested per head, there is a return on investment of about $1.35. So it's almost double. And when you look at this, and when you look at the last column on our table here, in 2030, if each state were to invest, in addition to what's being invested in health, $1.25 per inhabitant, there will be a return of investment of $14 that would be gained with regard to productivity and also the GDP. So investing in the fight against non-communicable diseases is making the appropriate choice to avoid losses economically, and also gains as far as our continent is concerned. As I close, I'm going to make reference to the major challenges that we're faced with as we fight non-communicable diseases. As you may have noticed, these are diseases which are increasing and they are growing. So the problem is not limited to the fact that we've got several types of disease, but it's also because we have disease problem, because one who has high pressure will get diabetes, will have cardiovascular diseases, will have kidney problems. So there will be several diseases which will be difficult to manage as compared to communicable diseases, where we have a serious episode that lasts a few days. So this is a big problem, and we're not used to managing such complicated diseases. And the second challenge, as far as Africa is concerned, is there's an increase in needs with regard to non-communicable diseases, and these needs are not met. This chronic nature of these diseases is a major challenge to our health systems, because our systems are not equipped, organized to meet and deal with such diseases. We are prepared to simply respond to transmissible diseases. So we are not in position to support over time our patients affected by non-communicable diseases. So this is a huge challenge to our health systems that should adopt approaches that are patient-centered, because these are diseases for an entire life. We cannot cure hypertension, but can only be managed. So, and we know that for the duration of the life of these patients, they will need support. And as such, we need to organize a healthcare system taking this into our mind. Now, another challenge related to the increase in the burden of these diseases, we have to consider communicable diseases. So this is a double burden as far as our continent is concerned. And by 2030, we will have a change regarding the epidemiological profile in Africa, because the non-communicable diseases are going to increase. But it doesn't mean that we shall have got rid of communicable diseases. This is why we're talking about a double burden. And another challenge are the commitments taken at the international level, but and also policies at the local level. Most of these commitments are not followed by adequate financing, and also setting up interventions that we have discussed here. Also, with regard to priorities, what has been noticed is that priority is not given to non-communicable diseases. So we are going to have to review these commitments and turn these commitments into concrete actions that will help us to implement multi-sectoral approaches that we have discussed. And the mechanisms for collaboration amongst the sectors exist in some countries. However, in many of the cases, these mechanisms are not operational. There is also another challenge regarding to the manner in which the non-communicable diseases are addressed. I'll give you an example on the fight against cancer. Among the 47 countries of the African region, only 11 countries have a national plan against cancer. So there's a lot that needs to be done. This is my last slide. And within the framework of universal health coverage, we think that we can make progress in this agenda that's fighting against non-communicable diseases. If we were to exert the necessary effort with your support, I think we would save about 8 million people by 2030. And this requires investing $1.25 per inhabitant per year. This would help in winning the fight. We need to know also that investing in the fight against non-communicable diseases is investing for development, because each dollar invested will have a return on investment of about $7, and it will help us to manage $137,000 for our regional economies by 2030. So I'd like to thank you for your kind attention. And WHO is proposing an appeal for action that we would like to share with you. We are appealing for action from you, the parliamentarians, you, the decision makers, and we feel that there's a role you can play as far as advocacy is concerned to ensure that the economic aspect of non-communicable diseases becomes visible in the eyes of our decision makers, so that we can also raise additional funding that will require through setting aside funds to fight these diseases, especially as far as non-communicable diseases are concerned. We also feel that parliamentarians can play a major role because the role of lobbying by tobacco industries, alcohol industries, agro-food industries, these all play a negative role with regard to factors of risk. Unfortunately, there are a lot of economic interests, and we feel that you parliamentarians could help us by playing a role and by voting, of course, adopting laws that would help in coming up with a multi-sectoral approach that's aimed at reducing risk factors. Thank you very much for your attention.
Merci beaucoup.
Thank you very much, Doctor. Dear colleagues, I realize that there are two items that are identical and which relate to health. With your permission, I'd like to bring these items together so that we deal with them, and that will help us to move forward. Mr. Zingas is going to talk about health at work, and then Dr. Margaret Agama Anyeti, who is head of division for health, nutritional health and population in the Social Affairs Department of the African Union Commission. Madam, I invite you to come into the chamber. And after those two presentations, we'll begin our general discussion, because we'll be dealing with the same subject, that is health. As Madame gets ready, I give the floor to Honorable Zingas to share with us the outcomes of their discussions on child labor. Honorable Zingas, you have the floor. This is a report on child labor in mining centers in Côte d'Ivoire. Thank you very much, Honorable President, honorable members of the Bureau, dear colleagues, members of Parliament. The summary of this report that I have honor to introduce is an outcome of a fact-finding mission undertaken by the Health Committee, Labor and Social Affairs on the involvement and exploitation of children in mining areas. This activity is part of the implementation of the work plan of the committee during the course of this year. So the delegations of 5 Pan-African parliamentarians traveled to Abidjan in Cote d'Ivoire from the 16th to 18th September 2019. And the delegation was led by myself, and we met members of parliament of the National Assembly of Cote d'Ivoire and leaders of various ministries and other partners. The main objective of the consultations was to assess the legal framework with regard to the protection of children's rights against exploitation in mining areas and the effective implementation of the framework. Honorable President, Honorable Vice Presidents, dear colleagues and members of Parliament, if the UN defines a child as any human being aged below 18 years, except in cases where national legislation determines applicable age different from what was stated. As a result, that child has fundamental rights like access to education, food, balanced food, and health care, depending upon the conditions in which they live. However, the world economic crisis that has hit our continent in a special way has made socio-economic development difficult, and the increased population growth by natural means or through migration, and the unequal distribution of resources within countries and high urbanization in certain regions are real factors that contribute to rising poverty amongst the people. Poor families are obliged at times to sacrifice their children by exposing them to trade and trafficking for their survival. Cote d'Ivoire is not an exception given its geographical position in the West African sub-region. According to a study that was undertaken by the Ministry of Employment and Vocational Training in Cote d'Ivoire, that country, unlike other countries of the world, has one of the highest rates of foreign nationals. On average, 15.7 of children aged between 5 to 17 are foreigners, coming mainly from Burkina Faso, that is 7.4%, and Mali, 3.7%. These foreigners are attracted not only by cocoa cultivation, which is the main activity and source of income of the country, but also by illegal gold panning.
The situation of these children is even more worrying in Côte d'Ivoire, despite the adoption of new legislation. And in 2016, 21.5% of children aged 5 to 17 were doing hazardous work in the country. Honorable Presidents, Honorable Vice Presidents, colleagues, Honorable MPs, the delegation exchanged with 20 MPs from different standing committees in Côte d'Ivoire to speak about the situation of child labor in particular, and also with regards to the situation in the cocoa farming industry and on the mines. The parliamentarians were very concerned by the situation despite legislation that exists, and spoke to us about the issue of foreign nationals coming from Ghana, Burkina Faso, and other countries that use child labor. And the crisis that has hit this country and in other countries is as a result of laxist practices, and also the responsibility of parents to fight against illegal mining operators who prey on vulnerable children. During our discussions with the different stakeholders, we noted that the cause that accentuates child labor is the structural and economic crisis in the country, and political crises in various countries has led to children being involved in these illegal activities. And because of the circulation of goods and people in the region, people are able to move from one country to another looking for a better life. And in some cases, this has led to children finding themselves in these clandestine mining sites. We also noted that the state follow-up of the legal instruments in the country is not guaranteeing the success of the legislation, and the concentration of measures is not helping the state to be able to evaluate properly the risk that these children are facing. To conclude my presentation, honourable MPs and colleagues, the delegation made several recommendations. First of all, to conduct an urgent mission, and the mission would be composed of members from the government and from social services to identify the children and remove these from these sites. We also recommended that there be a parliamentary study to understand exactly what is going on and where all of these sites are, to determine who the responsible parties are, all the stakeholders, and in order to propose long-term solutions, and then also identify fertile ground and redistribute it to families for agriculture so that this can improve their quality of life, and then strengthen the educational and sensitizing campaigns, especially to parents, so that they can understand the importance of sending their children to school and protecting their children, and strengthen cooperation between the countries, particularly the countries from whence the migrants come and the countries which they go to, and then protect children's rights and strengthen capacity among the legal fraternity and magistrates. Honourable President, Honourable Vice Presidents, dear colleagues, this is a summary of the mission that we conducted on social responsibility of parliamentarians in the fight against child labour in mining areas. And I would like to seize this opportunity to sincerely thank all our colleagues from Côte d'Ivoire, particularly Honourables Kone Dognon, Kone Sidiki, and Jumat Juliette Camara, who did everything they can to assist us and ensure that the mission of our committee was a great success. Thank you very much. Thank you, Honourable. And now we are going to follow up this report on the fight against child labour in mining areas with the program on nutrition. And I would therefore like to give the floor to Dr. Margaret Akama, who's Head of Department for Health, Nutrition and Population in the Department for Social Affairs. Doctor, you need to tell us what we need to eat and what we need to not eat so that we can all be in good health. Thank you very much. You have the floor.
Good morning, Honorable Speaker, Honorable Vice President, Honorable members of this Honorable House. I bring you the greetings of Her Excellency Amira El Fadil, Commissioner of Social Affairs of the African Union Commission. My remarks this morning will be extremely brief, given that our partners and colleague WHO have already presented in great depth on the issue of non-communicable diseases. Indeed, the WHO had approached the Commission to take this matter before the heads of state and government, and we felt that it was appropriate that we first engage with the parliamentarians of the continent, starting with the Pan-African Parliament. It is recognized that the best remains a threat to the vision for a prosperous Africa, and in particular for the realization of Agenda 2063 and its aspiration for a high standard of living, quality of life, sound health, and well-being as enshrined in Aspiration 1. We also align ourselves with the United Nations and with WHO that the NCDs are a cause of inequalities and a threat to sustainable development. We recognize that the NCDs is therefore important if Africa is to achieve and sustain inclusive economic growth as envisioned in our agenda. There's a huge economic burden of the NCDs, and African people and governments are losing money from the morbidity and mortality that are associated with it. The cost, the economic costs are both direct, related to the health cost, which my colleague has already spoken in depth about, and the indirect cost, productivity losses, when sick individuals and caregivers are not able to contribute to national economies. So a vicious cycle results between the chronic disease and sustained economic development and growth. Now, there have been a number of studies on the NCDs. WHO has done theirs, the World Economic Forum has also done, the World Bank has also done studies. But we think what is missing is the cost to each sector of national governments. So the transport industry will have to look at the cost, the energy industry will have to look at the cost, not only to its workers, but to their individual agendas. And this is one of the reasons why we are pushing and advocating for a multi-sectoral response to addressing the NCDs. Now, as my brother has already spoken to, the risk factors have been identified, inclusive of tobacco, unhealthy diet, and physical inactivity. And I'm not going to go into great depth into all of that, but to say that we are working closely with the African Union champion on nutrition in his name of His Excellency III, King Letsie III of Lesotho, who is leading the continental agenda on nutrition. And indeed, tomorrow we shall be in Lesotho with him, where he's holding a private sector consultation with parliamentarians and this representation from this honorable house and the private sectors to see how they can engage with us to address the issues of nutrition and indeed NCDs. And the multi-sectoral response to NCDs must also be health in all policies, whole of government approaches, and whole of society approaches, including civil society and the private sector. I apologize to you. I have a nice slide here, which I will give to the Honorable Chair of the committee, which can be distributed. But prevention and control of the NCDs is not a health issue alone and must be driven by strong regulatory policies and strategies. We believe there should be population-based interventions and individual-based interventions, and the population-based ones will be pillared on a multi-sectorial approach, and which involves all the other sectors, as I have already mentioned. And if this is equitable, then sectors such as the environment, finance, trade and industry, labor, socio-economic development, sports, transport, urban planning, agriculture, communication, education, and energy must all contribute to the equitable response. And it's for this reason that we believe that the various subcommittees within Parliament should be engaged in discussing the NCDs. In some sort of conclusion, we are advocating for stronger political will beginning at the level of Parliament, the coordination of getting the various sectors to work together, and for adequate financing, as well as for the right legislation to be put in place in order to address the NCDs. This would also mean scaled up advocacy and a facilitated process through which the non-health sectors can collaborate with the health sector to address the NCDs. Equitable multi-sectorial budgeting and commitments, and legislation and laws such as labeling, appropriate labeling on foods that will provide advice for the public. Permit me to stop there, and thank you for your engagement.
Thank you, Doctor. Chers collègues, vous venez.
Colleagues, you have just followed 3 presentations, and I would now like to ask you if you have any questions, to ask your questions, but to please try to limit the comments to a minimum, because we still have 2 more presentations and discussion to come before the end of our session this morning. Please keep your questions very brief. And the first to ask the floor is Honorable Paulette Mongengi from the Gabon.
Merci, Monsieur le Président.
Thank you, Mr. President, for giving me the floor. I would firstly like to thank the presenter on non-communicable diseases from the WHO. We got lots of information from this presentation, and I think that this information will allow us to regulate our own lives. Non-communicable diseases are very often chronic diseases because they last a very long time, and the cost of medication is still very expensive. In my country, we have universal health coverage. However, sometimes the budget that is attributed to this initiative is not enough to cover the cost of medicine. And so what does the WHO advise for countries who do not respect the commitments they have made, for example, in Abuja? And another question to the same presenter. with regards to the measures that have been advised to fight against tobacco and alcohol. I would like to know which are the countries that have already put measures in place. Has the WHO evaluated these countries to see whether these measures are actually bearing fruit and have lowered non-communicable diseases? I'm not sure if I can carry on. Ask questions. My last question, because I'm on both lists, and it's actually not really a question because I was part of the mission to Côte d'Ivoire. I would just like to say that my concerns were addressed, and I found that what I thought had been forgotten had actually been taken into account by the authorities in Côte d'Ivoire. Honorable Gianna from Malawi. Jeremiah from Malawi. Is she not in the chamber? Okay, then I give the floor to Honorable Felisberto Gera from Cape Verde. Honorable from Cape Verde, you have the floor.
Thank you, Honorable President, for giving me the floor. Good morning to you all. I'd like to talk about the topic on non-communicable diseases in Africa and their causes. First, I would like to congratulate the presenter for the brilliant presentation and for the relevant information that it conveyed to us at this Democracy House on matters that are of great importance to our lives, to our families, and particularly to our children and grandchildren. Indeed, non-communicable diseases present a major burden to the society worldwide, and particularly to our continent. They constitute one of the major causes of deaths in Africa, and one of the major causes of risk factors to life and public health on our continent. Diseases like cancer, diabetes, pulmonary issues, mental diseases, etc., constitute one of the serious public health problems and a risk to the development of our continent. I do believe that we should invest in prevention as the best weapon, on education for citizenship as one of the main weapons, change, behavioral change and attitudinal change, and change in the lifestyle, and to live a very healthy life, practicing sport and balanced diet and moderate consumption of alcohol. Africa, according to WHO data, more than 40% of adults have hypertension, suffer from hypertension. And as experts say, hypertension is a kind of silent death or silent murder. In a period of 5 years, 44 million persons worldwide run the risk of contracting non-communicable diseases, which represents an increase of 15% to 2010 statistics. Cape Verde, my country, is at a transition phase of the infectious diseases to non-communicable chronic disease, and which are now at 36% among Cape Verdeans. But we are embarking on a transition epidemiological transition with a new profile which requires new strategies and new approaches. And we have to invest on prevention education so that we can have universal access to the promotion of health and to a better future. Cape Verde has attained the majority of the objectives, and the healthcare is based on prevention, and there's a campaign which is spearheaded by the president, which is Greater Life. This takes place within the cities, universities, and schools. And I do believe, as the WHO Director for Africa said, we need to win this battle with the engagement of all, with good policies, good practices, and adequate financial resources. I usually say that investing on education and health is not an expenditure, it's an investment in the future. Thank you, Honorable President.
Is now given to Aladi Esgabo from Gambia. Honorable from Gambia, you have the floor.
Mr. President, my intervention will be a form of a question on the presentation about the fact-finding mission in the fight against child labor in the mining area in Côte d'Ivoire. The report indicated that Côte d'Ivoire, unlike other countries in the world, has one of the highest rate of foreign nationals. In the average, 15 to 17, of which are children from the age 5 to 17, are foreigners. And then these are mainly from Burkina Faso, out of which are 7.4%, and Mali, 3.7%. These foreign nationals mainly work not only at the cocoa plantation areas, but the illegal mining areas. My question to this is that whether it is the foreign nationals in Côte d'Ivoire, foreign national children in Côte d'Ivoire who are involved in this child labor at the mining areas. The report also tried to make recommendations that in order trying to remedy this, the report recommended that to carry out fact-finding missions comprising Ivorian parliamentarians to make an assessment and objective analysis of situation because it is deep-rooted in the problem. I want to observe that it should not be limited to only Ivorian parliamentarians, in the sense that the root cause of the people who are involved or highly involved in the illegal mining or in the child forced labor at the mining areas are mainly children or people from Burkina Faso and Mali. Could it not be necessary the fact-finding or the committee try to also engage and involve the parliamentarians from both countries, that is Burkina Faso and then Mali? The other question that will be relating to the report from WHO concerning the non-communicable diseases. It is believed that we have killer diseases in Africa, among them AIDS, that is widely known, but non-communicable diseases are equally silent killer diseases. It is noted that the high blood pressure is high in the region. I want to note which particular reference is that. Is it where the research was based or the region referred to Africa in general? And that in 11 countries, 82% do not know their status. And which 82 in these 11 countries, which particular countries is the report trying to refer to? And then what is WHO trying to do in order to improve the knowledge of the status of the high blood pressure known to those specific countries. Thank you.
Merci beaucoup.
Thank you very much. The floor is now given to Honorable Segabo Solomon Thomas from Sierra Leone. Honorable Thomas, you have the floor.
Honorable members, child labor is not peculiar to Ivory Coast alone. Child labor is everywhere. In every state of the continent of Africa, we have this problem of child labor. And of course, Mr. President, honorable members, Africa is not bereft of good laws for prevention. There are national and international legal frameworks that our nations in Africa have adopted for preventing this malaise. The question, therefore, is why have we not curbed this particular disease in this continent? As Africans and as leaders of this great continent, we need to do more. The future of this continent is being sold to the dustbin. The future of our children is being sacrificed because we as leaders have refused deliberately to do something to stop this particular malaise in the continent. I refuse, Mr. President, honorable members, to accept the fact that we cannot prevent child labor in this continent. I refuse that particular assertion. It can be stopped if we are willing as leaders, elected leaders of this continent, to take the right decisions. Of course, it is very, very easy to identify the areas of child labor. All we need to do is to effect the necessary sanctions. But what I have realized, Mr. President, honorable members, is the fact that as Africans, as African leaders, we do the talk shop for most of the time. We come to conferences, we come to parliaments, we talk and talk and talk, and that's the end. Nothing is being done. While the lives and the future of our continent is going down the drains. It is about time, honorable members, that I urge you, if we leave this place and go back to our parliaments, that we go all out to ensure that this time we take the necessary action to ensure that the future of our children is protected. I thank you, Mr. President.
Merci beaucoup.
Thank you very much. I now give the floor to Honorable Maxa. Sorry, no. Yes. Honorable Maxa Mwepa Ngonga from Zambia.
For this opportunity. And since I appear on both presentations, Mr. President, just allow me to make a few comments on non-communicable diseases, and I thank the presenters for, for this information that they continue to give to us. Mr. President, we all know that, as countries raise their standards of living, we all as Africans envisage an Africa we want by 2063 with raised incomes, rising middle income, groups. What it has actually brought about is the fact that the more incomes and the more population that get into these brackets, we change our, our feeding and activity patterns. And especially this generation, Mr. President, because as we were growing up when we were young, we were all looking forward to having, better lives. And these lives I'm looking at now is a life where, we see it now, it's a danger life because of obesity, inactivity, and probably staying most of the time in offices without much activities. I would just want to find out from, from the doctor or the presenters, what is it that WHO, together with other partners, we are doing to ensure that we raise a generation. I look for hope from the young generations that are probably starting their basic primary schools, as a generation that will probably take this message, very, very seriously, because in my generation and those that are within my category, probably we were looking for a life that we've now come to realize that is a life that will probably shorten even our lives going forward. But what is it that we are doing to ensure that the education systems, the knowledge that we are giving to the leaders is given to those that are growing up, so that as they grow up, they avoid the pitfalls that we're falling into because of what we are projecting in the future. On the child labor, Honorable President, allow me to indicate that the child labor is not only in Burkina Faso or in Cote d'Ivoire, as the report has indicated, is probably across the whole continent. And studies from the ILO in 2016 indicated that about a fifth of the African children are involved in one form of child labor or the other. And the many causes we know, poverty is one of them, but I think lack of compulsory and free education is a major cause on child labor. And therefore, it calls upon the leaders, both parliamentarians and the executives, to ensure that we put funds to education, not only to educate the children, but also to educate the parents. Because we know for sure that educated parents would do much better for their children in order to avoid child labor. Put a one more minute, Mr. President. Put a question to the presenter.
Vous ne pouvez pas demander de vous accorder alors que vous avez déjà pris.
Thank you very much. I just wanted to check again, with the presenters, what programs that we have in place again for the young generation, that could be impacted positively with these messages, so that we avoid this child labor in future. But it's a serious problem across the entire Africa. I thank you, Mr. President.
Thank you very much.
I give the floor to the representative of Gambia, Fatou.
Thank you very much, Mr. President, for giving me the floor. My question will go to the presenter on the fact-finding mission on child labor in the mining areas. Mr. President, I think I want the presenter to elaborate more on the findings, because he stated that they did the findings and they observed that most of these child who are in the mining areas are from foreign national countries. I want to know whether they further consult these parties concerned, whether they were driven by economic hardship from their countries or they are refugees. Question number 2 is, I'm going to ask WHO representative about the non-communicable disease. When we talk about the non-communicable disease, mental disorder, if I may relate this one to the free movement of service and goods, like trading between African and African countries, I think we all need to do more, because most of these drug abusers in some countries, their countries are not, that they didn't get the drug from, they didn't have the drug from their country, but it was rather imported from other countries to their countries. So I don't know what mechanism as PAP or WHO can do to monitor the free movement of illegal goods such as dangerous drugs to other African countries. Thank you.
Merci beaucoup. Thank you very much. I give the floor to Honorable Nwani Roko from Equatorial Guinea. You have the floor, sir.
¿Esta es la traducción? Sí, ¿esta?
Yes.
Yes, there is a translation available. Thank you very much. Thank you. I wish to put a question to the presenter. His presentation was very good, and we were able to evaluate the measures adopted and the levels of non-communicable diseases in Africa. But let me put this question to him. He referred to 11 countries out of the 55 African countries. I would have liked him to tell us more precisely which are these 11 countries. Now to the Committee on Health, I would like to make the following recommendation. We heard that diseases are expanding in Africa, but very little is done in the area of prevention. In Africa, 60% of the population are farmers, and today they use pesticides to produce. These pesticides are causing many diseases among our farmers, and they are harming our land and population. If you use those pesticides, at some point they reach urban areas and affect the population. Since we are working with the WHO, I would like to know whether the consequences of pesticides have been studied. 1 minute more, Mr. President. Thank you, Mr. President. If in this session we do not take into account the impact of pesticides, we need to consider the matter in the next meetings, and the Committee on Health can collaborate with the WHO to study the impact of pesticides. Honorable Evangelina Phenomena Ebole from Equatorial Guinea. Honorable Evangelina, you have the floor. Thank you very much, Mr. President. Once again, thank you for giving me the floor. I would like to raise the issue of child labor. A 5-year-old boy who cannot even look after himself should not work in a mining, and if we do this, he will die. And people barely reach the level of the age of 40 because they die. So these children are used to do anything. We are dealing here with work in the mines. And these kids also become delinquent as a result. They are ill-treated, and what I would like to suggest for PAP is the following. With this report, PAP can suggest to our governments to pay attention to these children. We know that education is compulsory in our countries. It's not possible to allow a 5-year-old boy to work. These children should be at school and they should be playing instead of going to work in mines. Because in fact they are going to die as a result of this. I know that poverty is a cause, but poverty has always existed. We need to make measures to help these helpless people. We also need them. Thank you, Mr. President. Sorry, I don't have enough time because this situation is really dramatic. I must say to our governments to do more to protect these children. These children will otherwise not have a future. This is a case of child slavery. These children will leave these mines simply to go to the cemetery and die. We know that in all countries, children help their parents. They oblige them to work in mines. Honorable, I can't really say more with regard to this tragic situation. Thank you, Honorable. I would like to give the floor to Honorable Mtui Motsamai from Lesotho. You have the floor.
Thank you very much, Mr. President, for giving me the floor. I wish to comment on the first presentation on non-communicable diseases, especially on the issue of universal health care. Allow me, Mr. President, to start by thanking the presenter for allowing us to tap into his expertise on these matters of great importance to our well-being. Mr. President, as representatives of the people, we have a moral obligation to unpack, interrogate, and analyze issues in an endeavor to come up with lasting solutions to the citizens' daily struggles of life. This topic puts a finger right on the heartbeat of any nation, and indeed, as the saying goes, a healthy nation is a wealthy nation. We welcome this partnership between PAP and WHO because it brings WHO closer to us and allows the flow of first-hand information as we continue to articulate the realities on the ground concerning the plight of the people, thus putting these conversations on a much clearer perspective. Mr. President, I wish to state, even at the risk of repeating myself, that the idea of universal health coverage remains an elusive dream to many, especially those residing in rural areas, because of many challenges, including but not limited to shortage of trained health personnel, absence of health facilities, and road networks. If, for those in dire need of health services, access is hindered, clearly we cannot even begin to talk about aspiring to achieve the Sustainable Development Goal number 3, which is about ensuring healthy lives and promoting well-being for all at all ages. For complex diseases, Mr. President, that require attention.
1 more minute, honorable member.
Thank you. Fees are exorbitant, and treatment for such is beyond reach by many Africans who struggle daily for the very bare necessities. Therefore, it is my considered view that WHO has to rethink its strategies to make sure that no one is left behind. Last but not least, Mr. President, I would like to the representative of WHO to make a brief comment on what is being done to empower the families with skills which will enable them to render support to the family members grappling with mental disorders, which constitute a complex epidemic, largely misunderstood and always surrounded by controversy and stigma. I thank you.
Merci beaucoup.
Thank you very much. Honorable Stan Mate from Zimbabwe, you have the floor. Stas Mate from Zimbabwe.
Thank you very much, Mr. President, for giving me this time to react on this report, especially on the non-communicable diseases. Mr. President, access to health care is a fundamental human right, and I will begin by quoting the Constitution of the Republic of Zimbabwe. Section 29 of our Constitution provides as follows, Mr. President. The state must take all practical measures to ensure the provision of basic, accessible, and adequate health services throughout Zimbabwe. The state must take appropriate, fair, and reasonable measures to ensure that no person is refused emergency medical treatment at any health institution. The state must take all preventive measures within the limits of the resources available to it, including education and awareness programs against the spread of diseases. Section 7.6 states that every citizen and permanent resident of Zimbabwe has the right to access basic health care services, including reproductive health care services. Every person living with a chronic illness has the right to have access to basic health care services for the illness. No person may be refused emergency medical treatment in any health care institutions. It is crystal clear, Mr. President, that the Constitution of Zimbabwe is in sync with the quest to achieve universal health coverage. Mr. President, it is said to learn that
30 seconds.
Mr. President.
One minute. I apologize. 1 minute. It's okay.
Thank you, Mr. President, for adding more 1 minute after the one you have mentioned. Mr. President, it is said to learn that non-communicable diseases account for 63% of global deaths, with 80% of non-communicable diseases deaths accounting in low and middle income countries. Yet, these diseases are largely preventable. Much of these statistics point at Africa as the most affected, Mr. President. Mr. President, our leaders have committed to ensuring universal health coverage by 2030, and it is our task as parliamentarians to exercise our legislative, representative, and oversight functions by demanding accountability in the health sector, particularly in handling non-communicable diseases. Mr. President, education is key. Allow me to say that nutrition education is so important so as to guard against diet-related non-communicable diseases. To this end, I would like to appreciate the work being done by the Pan-African Parliament Alliance on Food and Nutrition Security, and urge member states that have not established local alliances to do so as soon as possible, Mr. President. Mr. President, I wish to suggest to the House a few points that will make us visible as parliamentarians in ensuring universal health coverage is achieved across our continent. 1. Passing enabling legislation at the continental and the national levels. 2. Advocacy for increased.
Dear colleague,
Kawoya.
Here is Kawora.
Kawoya.
Kahoya.
Kawoya.
Kahoya.
Yes. Thank you so much, Mr. President.
Thank you, Anifa Kahoya.
Kawoya. Thank you so much, Mr. President. I want to thank the presenters, and I want to support the report, though with some observation. And I want to confine myself on the issues of child labor, and this goes together with child mining, working in the mining sector. Mr. President, honorable colleagues, we are all aware that under the WHO, children working in the mining sector is prohibited. So it's on us to ensure that the reinforcement and enforcement of this prohibition is taken into account by the Pan-African Parliament and all other people. Number 2, Mr. President, I want to look at the child labor export. As one colleague said, it's not only that it is in Cote d'Ivoire where there is the highest export of foreigners in the names of children. I'm sure Ugandans may find themselves that way. But we should look at it as the child export. And when we are looking at child export, which has got child trafficking, child now currently it is a new modern slavery, and the abuse and in form of economic exploitation. I want us to look at the issue that globally there is an issue to look at our policies, member state policies, as concerns labor export. When we talk about labor export, this is where much of the problem is coming in, and labor export, which is next to drug trafficking in terms of looking. Thank you, Mr. Chairperson. I was explaining the pronunciation of my name. As I conclude, Mr. Chairperson, Mr. President, sir, it's high time that we looked at the child and the youth child as the next generation that is going to transform and accelerate our economic growth on the African continent. And it is high time that we looked into the issue of child export, child labor. I thank you.
Anifa Kaoya, le débat général est clos.
The general debate is ended. I had 3 lists and your names were not included. And since we do not deny the floor, you will take it while observing a 2-minute rule. Carol and your neighbor. Thank you, Honorable President. Do I have the floor? Wait a minute, please. So we are going to have a 4th list, says the President. We have 2 presentations before we adjourn. You have the floor. Thank you, Honorable President, for giving me the floor. I shall be very brief indeed. I would like to thank the representative of the WHO for his presentation this morning. I have a question to put to him. I wanted to know whether the WHO has a sensitization program to prevent non-communicable diseases which represent a serious public health issue in our countries. Yes, your neighbor. Thank you, Mr. President. I would like to congratulate Dr. Kabore for his presentation. I wanted to say that epidemiological communication is obvious. The question to Dr. Kabore is the following. You suggested a change in our paradigms, but the initial paradigm is to provide integrated, comprehensive, and continuous health care provided by primary health centers. Why did you decide to leave those paradigms which enabled health systems to face all health problems, and then you moved towards a selective healthcare system? Are you going to focus on selective health systems or an integrated, comprehensive health system? Thank you. Honorable Wakia, you have the floor. Thank you, Mr. President. I wish to congratulate the various speakers for the quality of their presentations. Let me focus on the mission to Côte d'Ivoire on child labor in mining areas. Allow me to say that at the beginning I wanted this mission to take place in Burkina Faso, my country. And since I was not a member of the committee, I could not influence the situation, and Côte d'Ivoire was chosen. In the same line of thinking, the report indicated that the majority of children in the mining areas came from Burkina Faso and Mali, in addition to other countries. I would like to know whether this information mission took the time to collect statistics on Côte d'Ivoire, or can we really only talk about the children from Burkina Faso and Guinea? So there is an issue that needs to be considered. In Africa, we have the same cultures and we do things the same way. If it is only Burkina Faso and Mali, Côte d'Ivoire, in my understanding, is not spared. And I know that there are children from Côte d'Ivoire who are working in these mining areas. Work in these mining areas. Here, Burkina Faso was the first to open mining areas where child labor was present with the exploitation of these children. Of course, there were problems of violence against children. I would also like to talk about terrorism. Terrorists use these mining areas to terrorize our populations. I think that this mission, which included a certain number of parliamentarians, and this is very much related to what my colleague from the Gambia said. Burkina Faso needs to be involved, and I don't know, but it would be good if we could have an in-depth dialogue, not only among parliamentarians, and we need a mission to Burkina Faso. We have problems there. We know that this is a continental issue, but it would be useful to have a look at Burkina Faso, and the entire continent will benefit from this. Thank you. Honorable, you have the floor.
I rise to contribute to the topic on the floor on non-communicable diseases in the context of the UHC. Let me share with you the situation and some lessons that we have gathered so far in Malawi within this area. As with many developing countries, NCDs were in the 1960s and 70s not a major health problem in Malawi. In these decades, they were less than 1% in terms of prevalence. The government was preoccupied with other issues such as malaria and nutrition. Later on, the focus moved to HIV and some related diseases. Therefore, only in the last decade or so, we started to pay attention to NCDs. But by then, the problems were already severe, making up a 30% or so of the national disease burden. Despite this setback, the government, driven by visionary political leadership, has taken bold steps towards addressing and reversing this trend. We recognize that health is a political decision and requires sound governance decisions to ensure success. Fundamental to this is the government of Malawi's policy to hold off on introducing user fees for health services. Since the early years of the structural adjustment policies, as driven by the IMF, Malawi has withstood the pressure of introducing these fees, putting the needs and concerns of the citizens first. Malawi has therefore also put in place a comprehensive health sector strategic plan, with the current one running from 2017 to 2022. Through this plan, we seek to ensure that we establish a non-communicable disease unit that coordinates national response to.
Very much. Your neighbor, you have the floor. The neighbor, you have the floor. The neighbor, please, honorable member. Please, 1 more minute is finished now. Yes.
Hello.
You have the floor.
My intervention will be...
I apologize.
Thank you.
Go ahead, please.
My intervention will be just on 2 items. Non-communicable diseases, most of the drugs which are coming into Africa are coming from India or other countries. They are not African modeled drugs. And when they arrive here in Africa, most of them, they end up having reached their expiry stage. And the other item which I also wanted to intervene is, can't we have a drug center and research center for these non-communicable diseases in Africa so that our drugs should be manufactured and prepared here? It seems to be another colonization with the drug being made in all foreign countries, not in Africa. The other item which I wanted to intervene was on cancer. Africans keep on forcing themselves or patients to go to India, and doctors in India are from Kenya. Why can't we have a registration of doctors who can help us to manage the situation within Africa, and we can save a lot of forex? Thank you very much.
Felix, you have the floor. And after Felix, Jacqueline.
Thank you very much, Mr. President. I want to bring to the attention of this Parliament and the continent at large that Africa remains the most diseased continent in the world. And the problem is being compounded by the high incidence now of non-communicable diseases that we have in Africa. Mr. President, we need to look at the causes of non-communicable diseases in Africa. One cause that is very important, a member raised here, is about the pesticides that we have here. As you are aware, many of our people are not knowing how to use the pesticides and how to control it. And many of these enter into the food chain of what we eat. Mr. President, we need to look at the radioactive substance that we have now. Many of the food products are being dumped into Africa. As you know, Africa remains a dumping place for food that are expired, food that are have incidents of radioactive substance. We need also to look at the level of pollution in Africa. We need to control our environment. We also need to look at the level of ultraviolet rays that we are exposed to. Like now we use phones. I know all the time we are using phones, but you know the effect of phones on our bodies. Mr. President, we need to look at the way we can reduce the cost of medication of non-communicable diseases. And I urge the African Union to take this as a very important point so that we reduce the cost of medication of non-communicable diseases. Mr. President, I rest my point.
Merci beaucoup, Laura Faye.
Thank you very much. Honorable Jacqueline will be the last speaker.
I would like to commend the presenters, and I would like to commend the presenters, but I have two issues. One is in regards to the child trafficking, and I would like to know how far, because in most of the countries, there are even no, look at the laws in the national assemblies, there are no laws relating to the rights and the protection of the children. And this is supposed to be our role as legislators to make sure that those gaps are addressed. And you find that child trafficking is on the high, rampant, especially in Africa, trafficking of children and of people. Our young girls are suffering in the different parts of the world, and we are very quiet and moving on as usual. And then, Mr. President, our Agenda 2063, health is key. And besides everything that we do, health must be a priority, because if we don't have a healthy generation, we are actually heading nowhere. Now, the hype about many other diseases, including malaria, HIV, has been very high and embraced politically by all the different member states. But then the issue of non-communicable diseases, which is killing most of us right now, is quiet. You are talking about cancers. We are talking about access to health. When we have cancer patients, we don't even know where to take them. Majority cannot even have access to health care and cannot afford to be flown to different countries for treatment. I think this is an area that we really need to put emphasis. And then I would like to ask the presenter, what is your say on these recent changes? Because the cancer rates have gone high in Africa than before. In the previous, we used to adopt to our own lifestyle. But today, with the introduction of GMOs,
it's okay, Jacqueline.
Okay, merci, President.
Merci beaucoup.
So
merci.
The introduction of
Veuillez vous asseoir, Jacqueline.
Please take your seat. Honorable, because you are my friend, the general debate is closed. Dear colleagues, I'd like to give the floor to the presenter to react, the presenters to react, but the reality of listening to you, you have raised very important issues. And what Felix from Uganda said is something that we witness. We consume what would not produce. And here, this leads to consuming toxic substances which cause diseases. The use of pesticides. And I've got an experience on this. I grow cocoa and also breed fish. During the rain season, all the fish die because of the pesticides that I put on cocoa end up killing the fish. And then the fish that resists is what we eat. So this is a big problem regarding pesticides. Secondly, I want us to be certain on this. The